Welcome to Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. An e-zine of the Futures Forum live online. We exchange ideas, information, and inspiration about the futures we want. Get Future Sense Now with host Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist and editor of Human Futures.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. This is April 2020, and around the world we are celebrating many important international days. Day of Creativity and Innovation. Then there's Earth Day, and there is Girls in ICT Day. And we're celebrating Girls in ICT Day in a very complex and challenging time. We are all experiencing the results of a global pandemic. So finally, we actually now all see ourselves as part of a global human family. So our conversations, we want to really look out at the year 2030, the SDGs, to see how ICT and women and girls in ICT can move us forward to the future we want, in spite of the challenges we might be facing with the COVID virus. In fact, maybe propelled by the challenges in the COVID virus. And for many, there has been this conversation about making ICT a human right. Well, we have an opportunity to go to the root, the heart of the matter, because our guest for this session is URSULA WYNHOVEN, and if I pronounce it wrong, she will correct me. But I think it's URSULA WYNHOVEN, and she's the ITU, meaning International Telecommunications Union Representative to the United Nations in New York. And this organization really works at the intersection of the telecommunications sector to bring it to bear with the development sector. It really concerns itself with how does it support digital inclusion. And she brings to this job many years of work with the UN Social Compact and ways in which she has worked across the field in different issues pertaining to public-private partnership in support of global development. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Welcome, URSULA. How are you? Good afternoon. We are on the same time zone. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Claire. I so appreciate the invitation to speak with you today on your show on the inception of this important in ICT Day. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule. So I'm really happy I'm able to talk to you as the organization behind the promotion of Girls in ICT. Why don't we start by telling me why is this so important that you have put this out as one of the global goals for the organization itself?
Well, thanks again so much, Claire. Girls in ICT Day, it's so critical because we need to get many more girls and women involved in the ICT field. And we need to be able to show them that this growing field, where there are and are going to be even more fantastic jobs and terrific studies and activities to be had, is a wonderful place for them to want to go into and to want to stay into. And the reason this is important is because if we look at the situation today and the current trajectories, we're not seeing the numbers of girls and women going into this field that we need in order to have the kind of technology sector that we need and want to have. So it's important today.
Go ahead, sorry. I'm going to step back and say, I just realized that you're saying we, but I just realized that I've taken for granted everybody knows who and what ITU is. So perhaps you should also explain for whoever is watching this for the first time, what exactly is the International Telecommunications Union and what is your function of the organization?
Thanks so much. So the UN family is a big one made up of lots of different entities. And one of those entities is the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. We're the specialized agency in the UN for information communication technologies. Do things like work on bridging the digital divide. We work on technology standards. We also work on making things like the internet possible by helping governments allocate spectrum between satellites and mobile, which is critical for having the internet standards, as I meant, a lot of development applications, helping countries with a wide range of issues, everything from gender equality and technology to cybersecurity, to child protection online, and even climate change.
You know, this is a long and big mouthful. I'm really excited about our conversation because you were saying before I really interrupted you that we didn't have the numbers. So when you say we don't have the numbers, are you talking about just in the global north, or are we talking about just globally? We're not seeing the numbers in order to kind of propel us forward.
Yeah, it's virtually in every country. When you're looking at employment and also at studies, in virtually every country, there's a significant underrepresentation of girls and women in these areas, both in studies and in jobs, and especially at the leadership area.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge is that we know that technology has huge potential to help contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also know there are lots of challenges and risks. But if we have a more diverse tech sector and a wider range of people of all backgrounds, women and men, girls and boys, in studies in the sector, we'll be better able to identify those risks and challenges and the opportunities.
Yeah, because right now we're seeing exactly, I guess, what one of the global challenges that have been talked about for several years. I certainly mentioned global pandemic as a global challenge back in a paper I wrote in 2014, but I certainly did not want to expand on it because I didn't want to even think about it happening. So here it is, I'm living it 6 years later, and we're all living in a digital world. So when we're saying that the ITU is promoting this agenda, how have you been able to sort of get support from the private sector in terms of making it more affordable? Because has it been declared a human right as yet? And if not, if it's not going to be a right, how are we going to be able to language it so that private sectors make it really affordable so everybody can have access?
So ITU is actually one of the few UN entities that, as well as governments, 193 governments as its members, we also have around 900 private sector entities and academic institutions. Members. Yeah, so it's really interesting. So we have a lot of engagement with the private sector, especially in the tech sector, especially in the telecommunications sector. And the reality is that affordability is so crucial, as you've noted. And in fact, in the Sustainable Development Goals, underscoring this point, SDG 9C calls for striving for universal and affordable access to the internet by 2020, which is, of course, is this year. And so during this health crisis, it really would have helped a lot if we had really achieved that around the world. And certainly we're far from that. Unfortunately, at the moment, affordability remains a really, really key issue. And what we find is that affordability, it's not actually just about one sector. There's many different factors that go into that, some of which are in the hands of the private sector, but some of which are in the hands of the government as well. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done to make internet affordable for everybody.
So we're talking about then, yes, the idea of SDG 9C, as you said, but then there's SDG 17, the partnership. You are fortunate to already be in an organization where partnerships is part of the norm. And you personally have come out of a background where you're used to working in these interstitial spaces to knit things together which don't always want to be together. On a personal note, as somebody who's a lawyer, you're not really a telecoms person per se, but I spend so much time in these spaces of knitting things together. How are you feeling in terms of your confidence about being able to really, okay, we didn't make it for 2020, but I think by 2022, because it's going to take at least 2 years to get us through this. And in the poor countries, we cannot have people out of school for 2 years doing nothing. So how are you feeling that civil society might be more helpful in advocating, pushing, and supporting their own governments, the different companies that we have some kind of access to? How do you see ITU really bringing in not just the, I would say, official academic and private sector companies, but now the users, if you will, into this space when we really now know we actually need this desperately?
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned partnership there in SDG 17, because that's absolutely critical. I mean, what's got us to just over half the world connected has often been the result of actions of the private sector and competition, etc. But to get the remainder of the world connected, we're going to need a lot more partnership. And part of that is because there's a wide range of factors why the rest of the world is not yet connected. There are issues of affordability for sure, but there's also lots of other challenges. There's digital skills to be overcome. There are some technical issues and infrastructure challenges and investments that need to be overcome. There's also issues even of relevant content. And a lot of the content that's on the internet is in certain languages, and yet there are many people who don't speak any of those languages, and there are many people who aren't literate in any of those languages. So we have a wide range of issues to be overcome. And since it's Girls in ICT Day, I think it's even more important to mention that there are also even some other factors, some social cultural factors that also impact who can access the internet and ICTs. And we find that there is gender digital divide, particularly in developing countries, and we need to be able to overcome those as well. So because a wide range of factors, we really do need all societal actors working together in partnership to address these barriers, to overcome them. It's really not in the wheelhouse of any one of the actors alone to overcome these issues and connect everybody.
But I guess what I'm seeing, or what I am, I guess, thinking about right now as I hear you and think through, the dark cloud of fear that's on one part of my brain, right? To the hope side is on the other side of my brain. It's like, surely we have the means, or we can find the means if we have the will, So I think that this pandemic is actually now forcing us to find the means, because no country wants to see themselves slide further backward into chaos. And so what are some of the things you think we ought to be thinking about on the civil society side that we can do as citizens, as activists, as advocates, to begin to promote partnerships in new ways? We've done little things before here and there, but we have to think all new now. It's going to be a new world. What are some of the new things we ought to be thinking about, you think, that you've thought about so far since the crisis in the last 6 weeks?
Yes. But one of the really critical issues is looking at technology as an enabler for other issues. And you started the podcast talking about multipliers and how you're such a champion of multipliers. And what we find is that technology is a multiplier, education is a multiplier, gender is a multiplier. And when you bring those all together, you have multiplier by multiplier by multiplier. And I think what we're seeing in the context of this COVID crisis is incredible mobilization of political will and also creativity, the things that people are doing in order to be able to continue learning for children.
Yes.
It's very exciting. Also, it's even amazing to see how cities and other governments are managing to bring internet to families who never had it at home. Here in New York City, before the crisis, around 25% of homes didn't have broadband. And it's incredible the degree to which mobilization has happened, partnership with the private sector as well, to bring internet and devices to many more children and families. Very good. And we see this happening in lots of countries. So I really hope that after this crisis is over, that's really underscored how important these issues are, that we'll continue to see this level of political will and interest to close the gap and ensure that we don't have to wait to 2030 to get everyone connected and to have everyone have the skills. So to your question about what can civil society and others do, I think help ensure that this issue remains on the top of the agenda, and not top of the technology agenda. But if we're looking at health, if we're looking at education, if we're looking at gender, help make sure that technology and connection to the internet and getting the skills is on the top of all those agendas as well.
Because the health especially, I think, because earlier this month we had a conversation with some African diaspora people here in America who are working in the health sector here, or health sector related issues. And they had some really powerful ideas around telehealth and making labs affordable for Africa, because these are people who are scientists here, but they're saying, okay, we couldn't afford this at home. My auntie can't afford this at home. And even if I send them money home, there's no lab like this here, but I'd have to do something different. So they have ideas, but what they lack is the platform and the partnerships. And I think, as you rightly say, the upside, if you will, of this very challenging period is that people are willing to look outside the box to create new relationships, of which I'm hoping ours is going to be a new and enduring one. When we think about, you said something earlier about governments and making decisions around satellites and those things, and I really was piqued by that, because I have been really struggling with this idea of access and who gets to make things happen. In the area of satellites, for example, we know how critical that's important for connectivity. And so I obviously want everybody to be connected, but how is the decision taken? Maybe it's a complicated question, but I really have always wanted to know this. How is the decision taken as to how spectrum gets allocated between countries, and how companies, private sector companies, get to go up and just put up things? I mean, who is the final arbiter of how many satellites a company could put up in space? How is that traded? Is that sold? I mean, how is that done? I have no idea.
Well, we have a whole section, the radio communications sector at the ITU, that supports these kinds of measures. There's actually a treaty on radio communications that even sets up a conference. It happens every 4 years. It took place most recently last October and in Egypt. And the member states come together and they work all these things out, and they make any necessary adjustments to the regulations, and they free up spectrum for different purposes, etc. So they come and do that together in a multilateral setting. Gotcha. And then as regards their own country, they go back and make these decisions, of course, for their own country.
Yeah, because I saw an article that the astronomers were saying that too many satellites going up is a problem for us on Earth. So here it is now. You see another problem. This whole ecosystem and the balancing of competing interests is going to be very fascinating even going forward. Because on the one hand, as a global economy, we're going to be needing to have people connected. But how we do this now becomes a problem, because we certainly don't want, as a human species, to be damaged by having too many things up in the space blocking us from, sunlight or whatever it is we're supposed to have, enough starlight and moonlight, etc., in order to survive. Because the animals need things, the insects need things, the plants need things. What would you say is a way for the civil society organizations, which are not, let's say, universities or private sector, being a part of the conversation of what the ITU does? Are scientific organizations or non-profit science type organizations allowed to become members?
Yes, indeed they are. And I'd invite any such interested organizations to check out our website or to reach out to us to talk about becoming a member. It's definitely possible and very welcome. And there's a wide variety of different kinds of organizations who are members of the ITU. And I'm really glad that you talked about the importance of harmonizing satellite orbits, for instance. This is one of the issues as well that ITU works on in the radio communication sector. It's really critical, including so, of course, that they don't crash into each other in their orbits. So we do need a key role for standards, technology standards, to help all this work.
You see the same thing with, so that's a job right there. So we shouldn't think of ICT only as coding. I think there's a sort of a mindset that ICT jobs are only in coding, but you just mentioned on a job that satellite management, whatever is an ICT function, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So there is the hardcore science of the technology, the engineering side of it. There's the software engineering side of it. But because many things now are designed and done using even AI itself, I would say young people in future, let's say engineering schools, will have to know things I never even dreamt of when I was studying engineering, you know, because that's the way this we taught is differently. We see now, for example, that many schools have been able to borrow from some of the bigger schools who have been able to teach things like physics and math online. But math you can always teach online, but I never thought you could teach physics online. How would you do a lab online? But AR and VR is helping to do that. So in terms of teacher training, is the ITU doing anything to support teacher training in the developing countries as part of its work towards getting more girls in ICT?
Yes, absolutely. One example, for instance, we have a partnership with Cisco on digital transformation centers. And a key aspect of that is doing teacher training, particularly given the current situation and the rapid and growing need to build the capacity of teachers to use these tools, convey this material effectively. And I'm so glad that you mentioned teachers, because they do play such a critical role, including on gender technology as well, right? Teachers can be really critical role models, and they can encourage boys and girls equally on these issues. So we really do need to see them as really important actors to help build their capacity to work effectively with young people, inspire young people, and have the skills themselves. So they need a lot of support.
Well, I can tell you one thing, in the Black community in America, and in the Caribbean, certainly between K through 12, the majority of teachers that we're seeing are going to be women teachers. So if there's any space that you can use to sort of very rapidly have an impact, would be to teach teachers to have comfort in using online tools themselves, and teach more teachers to teach ICT. So besides Cisco, are there any other companies that you might want to flag and say, hey, they're doing something to support girls in ICT that you are aware of?
Oh, sure. So many companies. I was just seeing the other day that AT&T has a really exciting initiative and program. I just saw an announcement that Microsoft is teaming up with UNICEF to assist children, particularly during the crisis with support. There's so many companies. I think if you look at most companies, you'll find they've got some kind of initiative. And I think that really underscores not only that companies at the moment during this crisis really understand, the tech companies, what an important issue it is, that bridging the digital divide, but just more generally, you will find that they also really understand this issue of how important it is on diversity and inclusion and technology to bring more people in. But we're still just scratching the surface, as we mentioned, because there's still so much more that needs to be done.
Because one of the issues I was thinking about also, certainly here in the American context also, is this issue about the schools, the universities, historically Black colleges and universities. They're Hispanic serving colleges, and they're also tribal colleges. And I was doing some research to see how many of them had computer science departments, and I'm trying to get a sense of how many of them were getting any real support, you know. And I wasn't seeing on their websites, like, you know, we are supported by this company to do this kind of development. And part of this issue of role models, as you were saying, role models mean that we have to move beyond, certainly in the Black community, you know, Michael Jordan or Jay-Z or whomever, not to say anything is wrong with them, they're millionaires. However, if we're talking about IT, we have to make some rock stars of, you know, the teachers and the people who are inventing stuff. And there are people inventing things, but they're not seen. Maybe we can use this as an opportunity, because ITU has convenient power, especially now when the spotlight is turned on America in a very curious way, you know. And certainly in New York, as you know, you live there, when you see numbers like the majority of people who are dying are Black people, then that includes Caribbean people, includes Black immigrants from Africa, Black immigrants from Latin America. It's not just African Americans. So it's really a global opportunity because we're all there. So I'm just thinking out loud, wondering, I wonder if there's something we can do now that might actually have a global impact by just working with New York in a different way. Because many of these diasporas are engaged back home, you know. So I'm just throwing it out there as something perhaps to be thought about later, as something we can think about as we begin to really process the new emerging ideas of shifts we might want to make. Talking about shifts, what emerging technologies would you flag as things we really have to start making sure young people are being taught in schools right now?
There's so many key technologies. One we hear a lot about is artificial intelligence, or AI, of course, and another one is blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
But they're really, and part of why I'm so glad you asked this question about emerging technologies, there's a group called GESI, the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, and they did a report with Deloitte that came out, I think, last September, called Digital with Purpose. And it was very interesting because one of the findings was that in these 7 technologies, a couple of the ones that I mentioned, but also faster internet, etc., they found that across the Sustainable Development Goals, if these technologies are fully leveraged for good, we could speed up implementation of the SDGs by more than 20%.
Wow.
And yes, and I think particularly given the health crisis that we see now, which really threatens to undermine a lot of progress connected with the SDGs, an opportunity for us to get back on track and things up by making sure that we close these digital divides and leverage technology to the max. And that's why member states chose 2020 rather than 2030, as the deadline for SDG 9C to have universal and affordable access to the internet, because they knew that if you were going to achieve the health goal, the education goal, the gender equality goal, that you can only do that if we have everybody having the access and the skills.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I was thinking though yesterday, I had one of my moments of panic, which was like, okay, because I was actually crafting a scenario, right? And in my scenario, I crafted that the internet went down for 2 days. And I decided, okay, let me back off of that and make it not all around the world. Let me just make it to the Caribbean, right? And that had me sort of going like this, what we would do. And then I said, well, I know one person in the Caribbean who kind of knows what would happen, but most of us don't even know that person. So they don't even know that person exists. I know that the CTU exists, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union exists, and I know he probably would have talked to them about it. But at the same time, I'm wondering, how would we cope? And then I thought, so what we did was, in my story, I said, so what we did was, we're talking to shortwave radio people. Thank God they had not thrown away their shortwave radio. So I started thinking about, oh my God, maybe I should actually become a shortwave radio operator, just in case.
Yeah.
So, but I'm saying it to say, you know.
But Claire, can I ask a question? Was this inspired by the fact that it was just recently Amateur Radio Day?
No, because I was writing a 2025 scenario about how we move through these years. And my scenarios are written not just like as an academic exercise, but as a functional design exercise, as if to say, okay, the scenario is written for myself. It's not written like for an organization. But in general, if I'm writing a scenario, I'm looking at creating a realistic path to whatever aspiration. So as I think about the fact that we're talking about, okay, it's not affordable, we are hoping now to probably move to 2023, maybe everybody will be on board, but I'm thinking maybe there are ways that, because let's say the engineers in solar are not talking to the engineers in satellite, we're not talking to the engineers who are thinking about shortwave in a different way, we're assuming it has to be only one way. And I'm saying it could be that ITU as a convener may want to actually now leverage the crisis itself to convene a sort of a rapid response, recovery, resilience, rethinking futures kind of conversation, the kind of thing that I like to get my head around, to figure out bringing the engineers together first, because they will, but not engineers like satellite to satellites with television, satellite, television, radio, everybody in the same room and then say, how would you solve it? And see if we don't spark some new ideas about reaching the rural people in the hinterlands in Suriname, or the hinterlands of Ivory Coast, or the hinterlands of the Pacific, where the island is so small that for them to get internet and data is just very, very, very expensive. And you can't run a cable on there, because not to reach 3,000 people. So we really have to think outside the box. And I think that ITU certainly has the capacity, bearing on what you're telling me now, to really create a really exciting way forward using this as a leverage. What keeps you up at night, though? When you think about all of things that you're working on, that you personally plus your colleagues are working on, what keeps you up at night as you think through your own legacy as a professional in this very important space? I think many people like you who work in development, who have worked so long on this side of development, the public-private partnership, it's really a passion job. It's like a job. I mean, it's actually a passion job. It's like, I've always wanted to work in this job and I got my job finally. What keeps you up at night as you think about the things you know you would like to leave behind as a legacy in 2030? And you can say, because I was there in 2020, this happened.
Well, I have 2 daughters, so gender equality is an issue that keeps me up at night. I don't know if you saw this report that came out by the World Economic Forum. They do an annual global gender gap report, and their 2020 report found that in the economic sphere, that the amount of time, the number of years it will take us to achieve gender parity has actually increased by almost 50 years from last year. They're now predicting it will be 257 years before we'll have gender parity in the economic sphere. And none of us can wait that long.
I don't think so. I don't believe that. I'm sorry. So what metrics are they using?
One of the reasons why they increased the amount of time they predict it will take is because, and this comes back to Girls in ICT Day, because of the low numbers of women in these emerging technology fields, the ones that are the highest paid and that will increasingly be the highest paid, most desirable fields, whether it's cloud computing, AI, data engineering more generally. So they were really concerned by the low numbers of women in these areas. So to turn this around and make sure that this is just a scenario and not the reality, it really comes back to efforts like Girls in ICT Day, etc., and what we can all do to lower the barriers, whether it is affordability or whether they're social cultural barriers, whatever it is, to get everyone connected, meaningfully connected, and not only just to be users, but to also be creators of the technologies. So
I have a question. Sure. Would you say that ITU has a number? I know that SDG 9C is there, but we're saying now, okay, we have to almost restart, right? If we're saying that between now and 2021, is there a number that we can point to, that we can say we would like to have in every country 100 teachers trained or 500 teachers trained, that from a multiplying engineering impact effect, if we had, because I think what has happened for me as a development expert myself, that sometimes the way that the UN state sings, it just sounds like a pipe dream. And nobody takes the time to create like a ladder or a walkway or a strategy that says, it might sound like a pipe dream, but it's doable if every country was to run a workshop that could reach, let's say, a third of your female teachers, right? Now that makes it a very different question, because once you say that, and we now like deconstruct what that means, we can now put in place more organized partnerships and strategies and programs and plannings around the design of way forwards, and create new partnerships and do more teachers of teachers and train of trainers necessary. And while that is happening, we're now saying, okay, and the engineers will be working on figuring out, if you're a poor country, how do you get your elementary schools, or you can't do all your elementary schools yet, how to at least get all your high schools on stream, so that by September of this year, If you only had 20 schools on stream, you now have 40 schools on stream. Because I know there are techniques, when you look at what is coming out, being put out by Engineering for Change and these organizations, you see that people are doing their things like things there. But for some reason, we have not been very good at capturing these engineering experiments and bringing them into the mainstream of the development conversation. And as an engineer myself who worked in development, I found it was one of my biggest frustrations, because most of the people at the table in the development assistance industry are economists or international relations persons. Most hardcore engineers are not there. So is there again room for ITU and your office in particular, because you actually are at the frontier of these spaces, to be able to say, maybe we should put together a different kind of thing right now to come up with these tests, these different tests we can do, action research we can do in the next 3 months to see which ones work, which ones don't work, tweak them like an agile approach to social engineering. You know, agile approach to computer technology, but an agile approach to social engineering, which is what I call my smart futures approach. Smart futures mean that we want to create sustainable systems. That's the S. M is the meaningful metrics. A is agile and adaptable agency. R is robust resilience. And T is transformative use of technology. And when I go out and start preaching my smart futures gospel, I try to tell people, if we're talking about a smart city, like these countries are talking about, it's not smart if it does not, if you don't have, it doesn't work for people, and you can't bring more people into the city. To have, who cares if your street lights can go off at night automatically if people can't afford to drive cars? You know what I mean? So how do we do that? So as we wrap up, I'm asking to Tammy, how are you seeing the shape of change? How are you thinking through yourself the shape of change that has to happen now? Now that you know you may have to shift some of the things you're doing in order to regroup.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to the key role of partnership, new and different partnerships. So to give you an example, for instance, UNICEF and ITU have this partnership called GIGA, and it's all about, among other things, aggregating demand for connectivity to be able to connect every school in the world with internet. And it has these 4 pillars: mapping connectivity of every school, financing a common bid, aggregating connectivity demand, connecting every school to the internet, and empowering young people with skills. So this is a new and different kind of partnership. And I'm seeing more and more of those. And then I should also mention the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, which is also all about how do we address the kinds of questions you were mentioning and connect everybody, and to do it before 2030. And they have set very concrete targets which provide an important complement to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, excellent.
And they have even, for areas that have particular need, they have additional initiatives. So for instance, one of the areas we're working on is a moonshot for Africa, connecting Africa through broadband. And they have a strategy for doubling connectivity by 2021 and reaching universal access by 2030. So one can see actually on the broadbandcommission.org website, not only find the targets, but also they've even come up with an agenda for action for connecting everybody, inspired by the response to the COVID-19 crisis. And part of why the Broadband Commission is a really exciting multi-stakeholder partnership for this is because its membership, spans government, private sector, civil society, UN, academia, and we really do need, as you said, to bring the best minds from different fields together. It's not just for the policymakers, it's not just for the scientists. We really need to bring the best from across these fields together in new and different ways to be able to solve some of these key challenges. We just can't afford to wait any longer, whether it's gender equality, who wants to wait 257 years, or whether it's get everyone connected to the internet. We need that by yesterday. So we really need to redouble these efforts. One other thing I would mention is, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, ITU also has established something called Reg for COVID, which is a special portal that policymakers and others can use to share good practices for how do you deal with the challenges of expanding connectivity and keeping it all running so that we can make maximum use during the COVID crisis and beyond. And then there's also a couple of webinar series that are being done to harvest the best ICT practices to help fight COVID-19, such as the AI for Good webinar series. There's also a WSIS Talk X series, and then there's a new one on digital cooperation during COVID-19 and beyond. So one can find out information about all of these at www.itu.int. But in a nutshell, I think really a key theme, whether it's about girls in ICT or connecting the unconnected, it's really about new and different partnerships.
Wow, I mean, this is really some great information. I had no idea, and you certainly give me a lot of hope. One final thing before you go, if you had to put out a headline of 2030 and what has been achieved, what would that headline be?
Let's see, a headline for 2030. Maybe it's that there is no more digital divide.
Yes, I love it. I love it. That's a very good place to end. I want to thank you so much, URSULA WYNHOVEN, ITU representative to the United Nations in New York, for taking time out of your schedule. Because people think because you're home and not doing work, but you are doing work, to speak to me and certainly to share your knowledge with the people who will hear this. I'm really excited about what you have said that's been happening, and I will be certain to make sure I post some of these links as well on LinkedIn and my other Facebook pages, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much.
Yeah, friends, we have come to the end of another very exciting conversation in celebrating Girls in ICT Day. We've been talking to URSULA WYNHOVEN. She's the ITU representative to United Nations in New York. And we have been on Future Sense now, getting Future Sense to bring us from the shock we're now dealing with COVID-19. Remember, our future is co-created in the emerging landscape. And so, go out and help us co-create the future we want. Until next time, as we say in Jamaica, walk good.
Thank you for listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson. Future Sense Now is produced by the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Remember, our futures are embedded in the landscape of our present stories. Seize the day, share this story, and share the future.